I am James Han Mattson, and this is the story behind the story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Tim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
James Han Mattson.
You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, please click on the links on the right-hand sidebar to subscribe to the show. That way you don't miss an episode. Thank you to all of our sponsors. We're going to be telling you about them throughout the show for making the show possible. If you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com and click on the link to advertise. It's up at the top menu bar. There's a brand new collection I'd like to tell you about. It's called Chronicles of Mirestone. And right now, it is available for pre-order for only 99 cents, and that's through December 1st. Go grab it before then, because you will not want to miss this collection. 200 years ago, the Dwarven clans and the Elvish houses of Mirestone were at peace. The king of the dwarves, in a selfish and greedy move, used his wizards to expand their mountain empire, raising new peaks from the forest floors of their elven neighbors. War and hatred ensued. The Chronicles of Mirestone offers a glimpse into the lives of the elves and dwarves living in the aftermath as they seek for a new peace. 6 talented authors lend their voices to a tale of destruction, mistrust, and hope. The Chronicles of Mirestone, go grab it right now at the wonderful pre-order price of only 99 cents. There's a link in the show notes. We knew it would be bad, but there are levels of bad. There was no scale that could have measured this one. Residents listened as 130-mile-per-hour winds tore away their roofs and struggled to stay alive as water crept into their homes, threatening to drown people in their living rooms. When the winds died and the rain finally stopped, the streets were only navigable by boat. The death toll rose to over 70, and more than 1 million cars flooded with an estimate of $100 billion in destruction. How does a community, a city, a state survive when hit by a monster storm and then have every square inch covered by over 4 feet of water? A storm which can only be described as a 1,000-year flooding event, worse than Hurricane Katrina, and broke all historical records. Lived through one man's experience as the world grew more and more uncertain. Experienced through the medium of social media the day-by-day visceral experience of watching people's lives permanently altered, and the heart-filling moments when strangers, neighbors, and friends stepped up and helped those in trouble. Watch as needs are met, lives preserved, and hope restored in the 2 months following Harvey. Get your signed paperback copy of 2 Months with Harvey by Terry R. Hill. Go to terryrhill.net. Proceeds from this project are going to benefit people still struggling in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. terryrhill.net. 2 Months with Harvey. Nick Breaker's book Essence, Book 1 Septima, one of the best science fiction writers I know. Nick Breaker weaves some of the best science fiction adventure stories you'll ever read. Essence, Book 1 Septima is a must-read. Go pick it up today. There's a link to it in the show notes. Third Scribe is the place for authors and readers to meet. Go to thirdscribe.com. You can set up an account for free, and you can link up with some of your favorite authors and find out what's going on with them. Authors, you need to have a place where you can highlight your books to your audience. Thirdscribe.com is built especially around books, linking people that love books with people that write books. Go visit them today. Thirdscribe.com. Tell Rob and the folks that I sent you. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Episode 20 just dropped today. It is amazing, with stories by Jess West, Rhett Bruno, Eamon Ambrose, Bob Williams. Tales is my favorite monthly publication. Go pick it up today and get that old pulp goodness feeling. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, episode number 20, out right now. Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia, 13 stories of animals and humans interacting at the end of the world. This project also benefits Pets for Vets, one of the most outstanding charities out there, linking up rescue animals with veterans that need some companionship. So go pick up a copy of Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia. It's only 99 cents while it launches. At the end of the show, don't forget we have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have James Han Mattson. Oh, let's back up and try that again. Okay. Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have James Han Mattson on the show with me today. James has a brand new book that will be releasing soon called The Lost Prayers of Ricky Graves. Thank you for joining me today, James.
Thank you for having me.
James, I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh man. Okay. So, wanting to be a writer. Well, there's I guess first memory would be, I would always write these things in notebooks, like these little ideas for stories. And, one day I had this idea of writing a story of 8 people trapped underground, in some sort of bunker, and people doing like these terrible psychological experiments on them. And I would, I filled a whole notebook of this, and I thought it was just like brilliant. And I gave it to my sister. I must have been like, I don't know, 13. And she just was completely wrapped. And, I think I remember, just getting that kind of feedback and her just wanting more, making me think, okay, maybe I should. I mean, it was much later that I actually decided to actually be a writer, but I think that's maybe the first memory I have of like really wanting to do it.
That's great. Do you have any idea what the inspiration for the people trapped underground was?
I don't really remember what the inspiration was. All I remember is there are 8 people from different parts of the country that all were taken underground, and people like the people that were testing them were testing their levels of fear or something, and trying to put them in these horrible situations to see how far they could go. I don't know. It was really amazing at the time.
That's awesome. What part of the country did you grow up in?
I grew up in North Dakota and central Wisconsin, but mostly North Dakota.
Gotcha. So you decided that storytelling was something that that you were good at, and that you had a gift for imagination. Was there anyone at school that recognized the gift in you and maybe encouraged you at all?
You mean in like high school?
Yeah.
Not at all. No, I mean, I was not I wouldn't say I wasn't a diligent student, but I was, I turned it around maybe my junior year, but I really didn't have any interest in my English courses, to be honest, when I was in high school. I like to read, but I didn't necessarily like to read what I was told to read. I was more interested in math, actually. I liked math more than I liked English.
For you, did you decide that English was something you wanted to take more seriously?
Well, I didn't study that in college. So like in college, I didn't plan on writing fiction or anything. I actually just got a business degree. And I didn't really think about it until I moved to California, and then I something happened where I decided, I was like, well, I could probably do this because I kept reading so many books. And I was like, well, why can't I just try it? Why can't I just try writing a book?
And so many people that have been on the show, James, have had a similar experience that we loved reading, we loved books, but there was this just kind of disconnect between, the books come from somewhere, someone's writing them, and one day, well, why can't I just do it? There's just a switch that flips or something where the craft becomes real or attainable or I'm not exactly sure what happens, but that's a lot of people have that same experience. We go to pursue something else, and then the storytelling just kind of follows you along.
Yeah, actually, I mean, what happened with me was I was like moonlighting at this hotel in North Berkeley, and I was only there from 7-11 to 11, like 3 or 4 days a week, just for some extra money. And I would just read because there wasn't a whole lot to do. There were only 12 rooms. And I do remember very vividly reading Clive Barker's Weave World and thinking, I mean, I could do this better. I mean, and actually after I thought that, I asked my boss at my day job if I could just stay after work on the days that I didn't work at the hotel, and just because I didn't have a computer back then, and just use the computers to write. And she was like completely fine with it. And that's what I did.
Oh, nice. What were so you were reading Clive Barker. What other things did you like to read? And were there certain genre that really captured your imagination?
I mean, to be honest, when I was growing up, all I really read was fantasy and horror. It wasn't until I decided to, I mean, even into my mid-20s, I didn't read anything but fantasy and horror. So I read a lot of Clive Barker. I read, everything that Stephen King wrote. I read this series by Piers Anthony called the Xanth series. And I read all of those. I thought they were just the most amazing thing. I mean, reading them now, I don't think that as much. But back then, those were, all of that escapism was just completely amazing to me. But again, it wasn't until my mid-20s that I decided to, branch out and read, what's, quote unquote literary fiction. And now, I kind of only read literary fiction. I think a lot of that is just because I'm teaching, so I'm reading that a lot. And a lot of it is because I'm reading, friends' books and just keeping up with contemporary stuff. But I really do my roots are in horror and fantasy.
Literary fiction gets a bad rap, especially, in genre circles and kind of vice versa, kind of look down our nose on genre fiction. And in the genre folks, look down their nose on literary as being dry and, pretentious maybe, or, but there's really this new wave of literary fiction that is real and is captivating, and maybe maybe there's a lot of literary writers who have kind of taken some cues from the folks who grew up on genre fiction like you did and like I did, and maybe or bringing some of those elements into literary fiction. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I read a book that has genre elements to it, but is kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, typecast as literary fiction, I get kind of excited because I think you can meld the two perfectly. I don't think they should be that separate or that separated. I don't know. I mean, I've had this discussion with my students as far as what makes genre and what makes literary. If there's an actual designation or actual elements involved with each that, I don't actually think there are. I mean, I think good writing is good writing, and it doesn't matter. I mean, the subject matter shouldn't really matter as far as like where we place it. I don't know, but I mean, I understand why people do separate them too.
Right. So you've mentioned that you teach writing as well. How did you go from getting a business degree to teaching writing?
Well, I mean, I did an MFA. So as I was, when I did my MFA, I was a TA. And so I kind of felt like that's what I was going to do, you know. And I didn't actually go back to graduate school till I was 29. So I was doing a whole bunch of other things, trying to, you know, scrap together a living writing. I mean, I wasn't really actually making any money writing, but like just scrapping together a living while writing. And then, so once I got my MFA, just, you know, I had that experience teaching, and so I just continued it, and I just have kind of been doing it ever since.
Where all have you gotten to teach?
Let's see. I currently teach at the George Washington University and the University of Maryland. I taught a little bit at the University of Cape Town. I taught at the University of California, Berkeley, and I taught at the University of Iowa when I was a TA. I did a little bit of teaching when I lived in Korea, but that was more kind of ESL type stuff. It was completely different than, you know, teaching creative writing. But yeah, those are I think I got them all. Yeah, I also taught at this organization called SMASH. It was at Stanford University, and it was just for high risk, high achieving high school students, and that was really pretty wonderful.
Nice. James, what do you think that you learn from teaching creative writing? You know, they say one of the best ways to learn something is to teach someone else and to help them learn. What do you think that you can take as a writer from teaching writing?
Well, that's a good question. Someone asked me that earlier about teaching. I think so I've taught business writing quite a bit. And I will say I fashion the class such that like we talk a lot about concise language, and you know, I'd have all these exercises and everything on concise and dynamic language, and language has always kind of been my weak point as far as writing. I mean, like I'm not the most, I don't think language is like my gift. So like actually sitting down and thinking about how I'm going to teach these classes on concise language and efficient language has really helped my own writing. As far as like teaching creative writing, I think it's maybe a little different in that I'm really, really focused on craft and like, you know, whether or not a piece works based on these craft elements. Yeah, I think I can transfer that into my own writing. But it's not always as direct as like the transference of the concise language type stuff that I did in my business writing classes. So yeah, that's kind of my answer to that.
Your new book is called The Lost Prayers of Ricky Graves, and this book is I've been reading it, and just kind of, it's one of those books that you read a little bit and you kind of sit and stew on it and let it kind of soak in, and you know, sit and just sit with the characters for a little bit. You know, there are page turners that you just are rushing to get to the end, and then there are the kind that you take your time with and really kind of ponder the characters and their situation. Where did the idea for this book come from, and when did you start working on it?
Let's see. Well, I started working on 2010, and what happened is there was a college kid named Tyler Clementi. I was kind of big, and he committed suicide. He was at Rutgers University student. He jumped off the George Washington Bridge because his roommate had videoed him, you know, being intimate with another man in their dorm room. And his roommate had invited other people to watch this spectacle and kind of make fun of them and just like be grossed out and everything, and that story really kind of hit me like viscerally. I just felt really gross after I had read the story. And when I have that kind of feeling about anything that happens in the world, I feel like I want to write about it. And so I wanted to write about technology, and I wanted to write about, a boy going through, what kind of Tyler Clementi went through in a different way with technology, and how we kind of how technology has changed the way that we interact with each other, for good and bad.
Yeah, and the narrative structure of this book is really interesting in that you have, I think, 6 different narratives that are intertwined. First off, what's the setup for the book? So you were motivated by this real life incident, but who is Ricky Graves, and how did this character come to you out of kind of the visceral experience you had from the news article?
Well, okay, the process of writing this book was just, it was about 5 years long, the process in total. The very first draft of the novel is nothing at all like the draft the book. It's just a completely different book. I had like a Ricky Graves character, but I didn't have, not in this capacity. I had a prank. I had a Ricky Graves character, I had bullies, and I had a town. So I had all of that, but like the actual structure and the plot of the book was just so different than it is now. It was just like it's just kind of the revision process where I finished like one draft. It just wasn't really that good. I scrapped it, started over, finished another draft. I sent it to a few of my readers, and I did a little bit of workshopping. And I remember one workshop person or one reader had said, well, this would be interesting if it was a bunch of first person narratives. And I was just like, that's interesting, because I had like 25 characters to start with. And I was like, well, which characters should I keep? And, I eventually whittled it down to 6. But it went from like 25 to like 16 to like 10 to 6. And that is kind of what happened with the book. It was just a lot of cutting.
And, the book really deals with, of course, bullying and our character's response to that, but it really sheds a light on, like you said, how technology has changed the way we interact with each other for good and for ill, and how we portray ourselves online. And how do you feel like this new technology and this new way of communicating is changing us as a society?
Wow, that's a big question.
Well, you're a writer. You're supposed to have all the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, let me give you all the answers right now.
Everybody get your notebooks ready.
Exactly. How has this technology changed us as a society? I think it's made us, pretty narcissistic, and it's made us like very, very hungry for validation. On the flip side, I also think it's connected us in this like really kind of amazing way that would never have happened before. So let's say you're struggling with something, and just think the people around you will be able to understand. There's going to be a community online that kind of, might understand what you're going through. And that would just never have happened, with me growing up. But at the same time, with social media and Facebook, I just personally, go on and off with it, because sometimes I see things that it changes my perception of other people. Like, someone is perfectly like fine in person, but then I see their social media posts and I'm just, why did I have to see those social media posts? Then that's colored my perception of that person. And I had this perfectly lovely perception of this person before. As far as like the way it's changed society as a whole, I don't know. It made us just much more distant from each other. I mean, it makes us like not able to interact. And I see, that in my students, it's just like this anxiety about talking to people instead of, talking virtually. I feel like our anxiety levels have like increased so much because of social media. And I think that's really problematic. And I think it's in the future, we're going to see, the outcome of this kind of hyper anxiety that's like currently occurring.
Right. The main character in the book, or the main subject of the book, has done some horrific things in response. How did you come up with the scenario for the book, and were you ever hesitant about writing about some of the things that you had to write about?
You mean about the shooting? Or...
Yes. I didn't want to say it. I was going to let you say it if I didn't know if that was spoilery. But, yeah.
Yeah, that's not a spoiler. Yeah, he does horrific things. The thing about Ricky is that he's a little off. I didn't want to write a book where this kid gets bullied and so he goes on this rampage. I mean, and that's essentially what happens, but I wanted to complicate it a little bit. So most people who get bullied, like 99.99999%, do not do what Ricky did. So what I wanted to do was I needed to make Ricky just a little bit off kilter. So like these things would be plausible as far as his story. But did I feel uncomfortable writing it? Not at all. I mean, I've written like a lot more, grotesque things when I was trying to write horror. I was really trying to write horror for a while, and I was writing like a lot of gross scenes. So any of the violence that happens in this book is really tame.
But maybe what I'm asking, James, is that there's horror that's over the top and it's kind of disconnected from reality, and then there's a story like this where you can follow a chain of events and you can say, this could really happen.
Yeah.
And that's a little more emotionally draining to write than the complete horror fantasy that is really just kind of over the top.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Was it emotionally draining? I mean, I knew from the start that this was going to happen. So I guess like it wasn't as draining just because I started with this idea that this kind of horrific event was going to happen. So it kind of became a little desensitized to it because it became like the main thing where everyone else's ideas about it were more important than the actual event. But yeah, I totally see what you're saying about that.
It was if you would have not had Ricky carry out the killings that he did, were you ever afraid that you would make Ricky into sort of a martyr with the bullying, and that he would not be a fully realized three-dimensional character?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. I mean, if I had just kind of like had him at the very last minute decide not to go through with this, I think that's like spot on. I think it would have made him like a martyr, and I didn't want that to happen. I mean, I didn't want him to be that way.
So you got the book finished. How did you get it to where it is now? What was the process like for you getting an agent and actually finding a publisher and bringing it to the world?
Um, well, it was it was full of heartache and turmoil. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's like a that's I think that's kind of a usual thing that a lot of writers go through. But yeah, so I finished the book. It was only like 63,000 words, so it was really quite slim. Um, and I decided to just do some cold queries for agents. And I went through like, I don't know, 50 or so. No, maybe not that. Maybe 35, 40 agents. Some people expressed interest, asked for, manuscript or whatever, but wasn't really getting a whole lot. And I was really kind of depressed. And I was thinking maybe I should try to do something else. And so I was teaching at the University of Maryland, and because I teach there, I was I get free classes. So I took a developmental cognitive neuroscience class, and it was
Like you do.
yeah, it was like a graduate level class. And I mean, I didn't have any background in this, but I just was interested in it. I did, pretty well. And I was actually at that point, I was thinking, maybe I should just stop. Maybe I should like try something else, because I don't know if the writing thing is working. Anyway, I went through that, but then like I was almost done with the class, and I got an email from this agent who's now my agent, Christopher Rhodes, and he was just so excited. He was just like, effusive about my pages. And I was really, I mean, that was exactly what I needed at that time. I needed that enthusiasm, because I was just not in a very good place as far as, the writing. So he offered to represent me. And I had it was still out to a few people, so we had to wait a couple weeks or so, just to have the other people read it. But he was like really, really courting me, and that was just so nice. It was like, okay, so there's somebody who really, really thinks this is something. So I ended up signing with him, and we went through some revisions. We ended up making the book go from 63,000 words to like 85,000 words. And then we went, we shopped it. And then, there's a whole another round of kind of rejections, and, going through that, like, well, I got this far, and now, I don't know if this is going to happen. So we went through 3 rounds before we got offers. And then, then I went with little A, and that experience has been great. They've been really, really great with editorial stuff. I mean, they're just really efficient. I've had a great time working with them.
What was the process like, James, for taking that novel from 63,000 words to about 85? So, adding just over 20,000 words to a finished manuscript. How do you go about looking for the places that you could beef up a little, or maybe, add more color? Like, how do you approach a finished book and decide to add to it?
Well, that was, agent's suggestion. He was like, 63 is a little slim. And his suggestions were in the manuscript that I'd sent him, I didn't have Harriet as a character. I mean, she was nice. A character in the book, but she didn't have her own sections.
She wasn't a perspective character.
Yes. And Christopher was like, we need her. And I didn't want her. So that was like a point of tension between us, because I was like, if I have the mother of Ricky in this book, she's going to overwhelm the book, because you have a mother of Ricky, of someone who's committed this heinous act, that would just be a whole book in itself. And so we talked a little bit, and I said, okay, if I'm going to have her as a character, she cannot just have like a regular section like the other ones. She has to have some sort of other section. And originally I had her write originally I had a self-help manual that she had written, and that was part of the book. That was her sections. But eventually I just kind of didn't think that was right. I didn't like it. And so then I switched to the emails. But that's kind of where the bulk of those 25,000 words came from.
The title is The Lost Prayers of Ricky Graves. What does that refer to?
Well, one of the characters, Jeremy, has he had a partner that was pretty instrumental in, the way he thinks of technology and everything. And his partner, gave up technology for a while. And they have this conversation early on in the book about technology, and his partner calls the internet, or specifically social media, a tapestry of unanswered prayers. And I thought that was, I liked the way that he thought about the internet and the way he thought about social media, and I wanted to kind of relate that to what Ricky was going through. And so, Ricky is putting himself out there via the internet, but like the prayers that he's, kind of sending out are kind of getting muddled and lost. And that's where the title came from.
Do you ever have one of those moments, James, where you write something like that and the character comes up with this, tapestry of unanswered prayers, and you're like, oh, I like that. I wish I'd have thought of that. Oh, I did think of that. It's just my character, it's like the characters become fully formed and start talking to you. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, my characters are in my head all the time, and that's not always a good thing.
That's why we have to get them on the page.
Yeah.
To let them out. The book comes out December 1st. James, what do you hope people take away from this book?
I just want people to have a conversation, A, about bullying, and B, about technology and how those two things intersect. I think what I tried to do with the book is, kind of complicate the issues. So we're not talking about bullying equals bad and, technology equals bad, but we have like kind of the positives and the negatives of these things, and talking about them in a more complex manner, I think is what I would like people to take away from it. So like, as far as bullying goes, I mean, like there's no real positive thing you can say about bullying, but like I feel like the conversation has become kind of like bullies. There's the bullies and then there's a bullied, and they kind of never switch. But the thing is, people aren't those designations. People are much more complicated than that. So the bully is a complex human being, just like the person who's being bullied. And that's what I want us to talk about more.
Sure. The book is called, again, The Lost Prayers of Ricky Graves. James, Han Mattson, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. Where can people find you if they want to follow along with the book release and everything going on with you?
Sure. You can go to my website. It's jameshanmattson.com. You can follow me on Twitter at JHMattson. Yeah, that would be great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, James.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hedwig slipped into David's den, the circular reading room. A ladder of crude rungs protruded from the wall, remnant of its days as a grain silo. He pulled himself upward, rung by rung, until the bookcases and sofas were far below. Even if he fell and died, he didn't really care anymore. No, he did care. He couldn't die yet. She had to die first. That would make their divorce final, if she wanted it so much. Darkness enveloped him. He reached the top of the ladder and stepped off onto a catwalk of black mesh, lit only by the faint light of the 4 square windows that encircled the turret. From this perch he could see the exit she would use. He felt like an assassin, like Lee Harvey Oswald in the window of the Texas schoolbook depository. But he wouldn't use a rifle. No, rifles leave evidence. Rifles can be produced in court. Rifles can miss. He pulled back a shroud of burlap and opened the cardboard box he'd stashed up here earlier that day. He reached into it and withdrew the only murder weapon, the only magic bullet a Van Brunt could ever need. The gold lantern flashed in the moonlight. He held it up to the window. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, he thought, and then it's time for a midnight ride. But it won't be Paul Revere. No, not Paul Revere at all. He found the oyster knife at last. He lay his cupped palm sideways over the vent. Don't get blood on your Armani. And stabbed the blade into his palm. The blood came hot. He dripped it into the lantern, where the skull of the horseman waited to sip it like nectar. The reliquary glowed, and an incantation in Old Dutch appeared, shining from within the metal. It was time. Hedwig bent and whispered into the vents. Rise, headless, and ride. The letters vanished, and a cold white light burst from the thing. The skull wasn't just a skull anymore. It had gestated. Capillaries clung to it the way fine hair clings to the crown of a newborn. A thick, carotid artery moved with snake-like undulation, drinking blood from the pool at the base, pulling it upwards to circulate through scarlet vessels, through twisting coils, slurping the liquid greedily, the way little Zeph used to slurp strawberry Nesquik through a crazy straw. The blood pulsed and pushed into the nose, into the eyes, into the hollow cavity within the skull. But was it hollow still? Hedwig didn't think so. He felt a mind growing there, something with a will to challenge his own. He fixed his gaze to the twin caverns of its eye sockets, speaking slowly and deliberately. Jessica Bridge. The death's head grin broadened somehow, and a thread of black and green liquid, shiny as a horsefly's wings, trickled from the gap of a missing eye tooth. Only Jessica Bridge. Do you understand? He shook the lantern. Do you understand? The face lurched forward and struck the glass, leaving a red splash there. It wobbled and settled, smiling and nodding. Jessica Bridge, hissed the face. Yes. Hedwig raised the lantern a little. Jessica Bridge. The red face tipped backwards and the jaw cracked wide. Hedwig recoiled. Something pink and wet writhed inside that mouth. The nub of a new tongue, salivating as if it could taste the name. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge.